Next time you shop for new clothes, consider this. There's an 87% chance they'll wind up as landfill. Australians are the second largest consumers of new textiles in the world, yet we throw out 6 tonnes of clothing every 10 minutes. Some of the world's leading experts on sustainable fashion have gathered in Melbourne to discuss solutions to this global crisis. Undress Co-Founder Edda Hamar joins us now from Melbourne. Edda, thank you so much for your time. I've mentioned some of the stats there, but how much of a problem do we have with disposable fashion?
Yes. Disposable fashion is a major challenge today. We are not only seeing a growth in consumption, a growth of 60% over the last 15 years, we're also seeing a decrease of usage. So we are buying more and we're wearing our clothing less. We've really moved away from seeing the value of clothing and we're not looking at it as a long-term investment. At the moment, our society is really consuming clothing trend on trend and changing their wardrobe far too often. I think at this stage we're consuming fashion at an unsustainable rate and we really need to rethink our relationship with clothing.
How much of it actually ends up in landfill?
Well, as you mentioned, 6 tonnes enters Australian landfill every 10 minutes, which is an enormous amount. And individually, we might not see it. You know, you've put a piece of clothing in the bin, but when you collectively see how many textiles are entering Australian landfills, it's alarming, and we've really got to start to think about how we can consume less and wear our clothes more.
We don't tend to think of clothing as an environmental issue. We're certainly catching up on other things like single-use plastic and so on, but it clearly is. What other impacts does it have?
Yeah, I think when it comes to clothing, at the end of the day, our clothes come from the environment. Our clothes are either polyester, and so they're originally oil, or they're grown in the agricultural space. And I think we've got to connect the fact that our clothes come from the planet. They are a resource that we are taking. We're living in a world with finite resources, and I think we've got to start making that connection between clothing and carbon footprint. 8% of global greenhouse gases comes from the apparel and footwear industry. So in terms of consumption, if we can consume less, it reduces our carbon footprint. And on the flip side, when we wash our clothes, we're also having an impact on the environment through microplastics that sheds off our polyester clothing in every single wash that we have at home in our domestic washing machines. So there's such a strong correlation between or connection between our clothing and the environment. And I think when we start to look at our supply chain and start to look at what are our clothes made of, what are we wearing, have a look at your tag. It really starts to reveal how connected the world is in terms of whether a garment is made in or textile is grown in Turkey and sent to India for production and sent to America for retail and back to Australia to end up in your wardrobe. There's so much that happens and so many people that contribute to one piece of clothing, as well as the carbon footprint in terms of the mileage that a piece of clothing has before it enters our wardrobe. So there's so many factors to consider.
And you've just held a symposium and a fashion parade leading experts in sustainable fashion. It was called Undress. What solutions are being offered to this global problem?
One of the solutions that the industry is talking about at the moment is the circular economy. So how can we take what we are today considering as waste, how can we collect it and actually break it down and turn it into a new resource? So textile recycling, we had Graham from Blocktex talking about how Blocktex is able to take textiles and breaking down cellulose fibres and polyester and actually starting to shift the way that we think about waste as something that we're not throwing it away because it ends up in landfill. We actually need to start thinking of waste as a valuable resource, and how can we close that loop and start to actually capture capture our waste and re-enter it into the system of production. And I think another really strong key message that came from the conference is the importance of our individual footprint and the power that every individual has to reduce our consumption and reduce our footprint and take responsibility for our actions. I think at the end of the day, Natalie Isaacs from 1 Million Women advocates for everyone taking responsibility, and everyone has power to make small choices in their lives to reduce that carbon footprint.
And to go to that individual effort that we can be making, what are some really quick habits that we should be cultivating to help with this problem?
In terms of habits to be cultivating, at the end of the day, I think the rate of consumption is unsustainable, and we have to reduce. We've got to start looking at alternatives to needing a new piece of clothing, whether it's borrowing from a friend or wearing something that already exists in your wardrobe, rental platforms. How can we shift our relationship with clothing, shift our relationship with consumption, and actually use what we have and invest in quality over quantity? At the end of the day, I think there is such a culture of consumption and needing to wear something new, whether it's going to an event or a wedding, but our wardrobes are overflowing, and so we've got to start looking at our wardrobes and thinking, how can we better utilise the clothes that are already in our wardrobe? Because at the end of the day, the most sustainable piece of clothing that you own already exists in your wardrobe.
It's a great reminder for all of us. Edda Hamar, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.